My mom hasn't eaten for 5 days. The boy said it the way a person says a prayer they have already given up on, flat and small, both hands fisted around a loaf of stolen bread that was bigger than his ribcage. The guard at the supply gate of the upper keep was a lichen named Ryan, 22 years old, half a head taller than the door he was assigned to, and he had been told that morning to turn away every beggar who arrived before the bells. He looked down at the child. The child looked up. He had a face the color of old tallow, and a bruise at the corner of his mouth that was 3 days into yellowing, and his eyes were a startling clean gray, and he was not crying. The guard had been prepared for crying. 5 days, the boy said again, in case the man had not understood the first time. She gives me her share. She gives the cobbler's wife her share. She doesn't have any more shares. Ryan crouched. He did this slowly because lichen guards were not encouraged to crouch in the presence of human children at the dawn gate, and because his knees did not want to. Where is your mother, little one? In the tanner's shed by the river, the one nobody owns. She can't hear you call, so you have to go inside. A pause, and then, with the precise diction of a child who has been rehearsing a sentence for the entire walk uphill in the dark. The king once said, no child in his lands would go hungry. So I came to remind him. The guard did not laugh. He had been a guard for 4 years, and he had been raised by a grandmother who slapped boys for laughing at the wrong moment. And even if he had not been, there was something in the boy's face that did not invite laughter. He stood. He looked back into the courtyard where the torches were guttering down to coal because the sun was finally coming, where the second bell had not yet rung, where the king of the Alpine Cantons was already awake because the king of the Alpine Cantons had not slept properly in 11 years. Ryan said the only thing that occurred to him to say. Wait there. The boy waited. He did not sit. He held the loaf the way a soldier holds a banner that is going to be taken from him in the next minute. What he did not know, what no one in the gate yard knew, what the man who came down the inner stair 2 minutes later did not yet know either, was that this small gray-eyed child with a stolen loaf and a memorized sentence had just opened the only door in the upper keep that mattered, and that by the third nightfall after this morning, a seneschal in a fur-lined coat would be dead by his own arrangement, and that the king would have stood in a kitchen at first light, listening to a woman explain in the careful, flat cadence of a person who had taught herself language from the shape of mouths, how to read the breathing of a wolf, and that he would have been understood, for the first time in his life, without having to say a word. Darren came down the inner stair in a plain gray wool coat because he had been on his way to the long room to pretend to read reports, and he had heard the gate yard go quiet at an hour it should not have gone quiet. And he had learned long ago that quiet was more useful than alarm. He was a tall man with the kind of stillness that made horses stop chewing when he passed. His hair was the color of wet ash. There was a scar that ran from the line of his jaw up under his left ear that he had earned at 16 and never explained, even to the council, even to his own sister before she died. He came into the gate yard, and he saw the boy with the bread and the bruised mouth, and he stopped walking. The wolf inside him, which had spent the last decade being a low coal in a banked hearth, lifted its head. Not at the boy. At the sentence, the guard repeated quietly, eyes fixed politely on the king's collarbone. He says, sire, that you once vowed that no child in your lands would go hungry. He has come to remind you. Darren had not spoken those words aloud since the famine winter. He had said them once, alone, on the parapet above the south wall, to a sky the color of slag, with frost cracking in the stone under his hands, and his sister's body 2 days unburied behind him. He had assumed, the way the powerful assume, that being unwitnessed was the same as being unrecorded. The boy lifted his small chin. "Are you the king?" "I am." "My mother is dying in the tanner's shed by the river. Will you come?" He went on foot. The council would later argue about this for an entire afternoon and lose. He took 2 guards because he was not a fool, and Ryan because Ryan had been the one the boy had spoken to first. And Darren had a very old-fashioned belief that the people a child trusted should not be replaced halfway through a rescue. The streets of the lower district at dawn smelled of wood smoke and tallow, and the particular wet iron tang of a river that was not fully unfrozen. The boy walked ahead with the loaf still in his arms, because no one had thought to take it from him, and because no one was going to. He did not turn around. He did not check that the king was following. He walked with the unconscious certainty of a child who had decided, somewhere on the climb up, that the worst that could happen had already happened, and he was simply doing the next thing. Darren noticed, because Darren noticed everything, that the child knew which alleys to cut through and which doorways to step around without looking, that he avoided one particular doorstep where a thin woman sat with her face turned to the wall, that he raised a small hand at a baker who was opening his shutters, and the baker raised a hand back and did not stop opening his shutters. The child was known here. The child had run errands here. The child had survived here. Darren's wolf, who had been a banked coal, was now a low, rolling growl, not at any threat, at himself. The tanner shed was where the boy had said it would be. It leaned. The roof was a patchwork of split shingles and tarred sailcloth. There was no smoke from the flue. The boy stopped at the door, set the loaf carefully on a flat stone, and turned for the first time since the keep. "She can't hear you knock," he said. "You have to come in slow because of her eyes in the dark. And don't stand behind her. She doesn't like people behind her." He pushed the door open with his shoulder. Darren ducked under the lintel. The smell hit him first. Clean. Clean was not what he had been prepared for. The shed smelled of dried thyme and goose-fat soap, and of faint resin, and of woman, and of long hunger, and underneath all of it of something so quiet and steady and unafraid that the wolf in him sat down and was still. There was a pallet against the far wall. On the pallet was a woman of perhaps 30, wrapped in a woolen blanket that had been mended so many times, the original weave was unguessable. Her hair was the color of dark honey and was braided in a single rope down her shoulder. Her eyes were closed. Her cheekbones stood too sharply. Her hand, where it rested on her chest, was the hand of someone who had worked with herbs for a very long time, stained green-brown at the nail beds, calloused in the soft places. She was breathing. She was breathing in the careful, measured way of a person who was conserving breath, the way another person conserves coin. The boy crossed the floor and laid his palm against her cheek. She opened her eyes at once. They were the same clean gray as her son's. She looked at the boy and her whole face moved, and she did not make a sound. And Darren understood, because he had been a king for 11 years and a soldier for 15 before that, and he had learned to read a room without anyone telling him, that the woman could not hear. Her eyes flicked past the boy to the door. They found Darren. They held. She was reading him. He felt it the way a man feels a hand laid flat against the chest in the dark. She was reading the angle of his jaw and the set of his mouth and the rise and fall of his coat where his lungs were. And what she found there did not make her flinch. She lifted her hand from the boy's cheek and made a small, precise gesture toward the floor beside the pallet. "Sit." Darren sat. He had not been asked to sit by another person in 11 years. He sat. The boy, satisfied, climbed onto the pallet and curled against his mother's side like a creature returning to a den. Darren looked at the woman. The woman looked at Darren. He did not speak. He was usually the first to speak in a room because rooms expected it of him, and he had not yet decided what this room expected. And the silence stretched and stretched, and was not awkward. It was the strangest silence he had ever sat inside of. It felt in his chest like the sense of a held breath he had not known he was holding, being slowly, slowly let out. Her name, when she gave it to him, was given with her hands and with her mouth shaped carefully around the syllables so he could read them too. Ilsa. She watched his mouth in return when he answered. He said his own name plainly, no title, because titles required hearing the rank in the voice, and she could not. And because he had a sudden, ungovernable wish not to be a king in this room. She nodded once. She did not look impressed. She did not look unimpressed. She looked at him the way an apothecary looks at a leaf, identifying what part of it would be useful and what part would have to be set aside. The boy, whose name was Tomas, said into his mother's shoulder, "He came. I told you he would come." Ilsa's hand found Tomas's hair and stayed there. She looked back at Darren, her mouth shaped slowly. "He is 6. He has not eaten properly in 2 weeks. I have been giving him my portions, and the cobbler's wife has been giving him bread on the 2nd day, and I ran out of the dried apples on the 5th. I am sorry he stole. I will pay for the loaf." Darren found his voice. "There is no debt." Her eyes tracked his lips. She tilted her head a fraction. He realized he was being studied for sincerity. He let himself be studied. After a moment, she said, with her hands and her mouth together, "Then thank you." He sent Ryan back up the hill at a run with 3 instructions, 2 of which were medical, and 1 of which was about a kitchen fire being lit in the small east scullery rather than the Great Hall, because the Great Hall would frighten her, and the small east scullery had a window that faced the inner garden and a door that could be left open. The other guard, whose name was Terry, he sent for the herbalist Marin, who had been his sister's friend and who could be trusted not to talk. Then he carried Ilsa himself, because she could not walk and the boy could not carry her, and there was no time for a litter. She was lighter than he had braced for. The wolf in him was very quiet. It had taken 1 long inhale of her at the doorway and had then gone into a kind of attentive stillness it had never demonstrated before in his life. And Darren, who had stopped expecting his second self to surprise him, felt for a moment as if a coat he had been wearing inside out for 38 years had been turned right side. He carried her up the hill. The boy walked beside him with the loaf of bread, which had been forgotten about as a stolen object and was now simply bread. People in the lower district stepped aside. People in the upper district stared. He did not care. He had not cared about a stare in 11 years, and he was not going to start this morning. The east scullery had a fire in it by the time they arrived. There was a stool, a low pallet made up with clean linen, a bowl of broth that had been kept thin on Marin's instruction because a stomach 5 days empty did not forgive richness, a heel of soft bread, and a pot of honeyed water. Ilsa was set down on the pallet. The boy was set down beside her with a smaller bowl of the same broth and a piece of cheese the size of his palm. Marin came in through the side door, took 1 look at Ilsa's color and 1 look at her wrists, and went to work without a word. Darren watched from the doorway because he did not know what else to do with himself. Ilsa ate slowly. She ate the way a person who has been hungry for a long time eats when she has been told by another hungry person that you must go slowly or your body will refuse it. Tomas ate the way a 6-year-old eats. They were halfway through the second bowl when she stopped. She set the spoon down. She turned her head toward the corridor that ran past the scullery door. She did not turn her body. Only her head, and only a fraction. Her eyes fixed on the middle distance. Darren, watching her, felt the back of his neck go cold. She lifted her hand. She made a small, careful motion, asking for stillness. He gave it to her. The kitchen went quiet. Marin stopped grinding. Tomas, who had clearly seen this expression on his mother's face before, set his cheese down without being told. Ilsa's eyes tracked something moving in the corridor that no one else in the room could perceive. After a long moment, she turned her face back to Darren. She lifted her hands. She spoke with them, slowly, her mouth shaping the words so he could read them too. Whoever just walked past your scullery door is not going where he says he is going. His footfalls are in a hurry. He paused twice. He is carrying something heavier on his right side than his left. He is wearing soft soles, not boots. And he turned at the second corner toward the south wing, not the north. Darren stared at her. How? She did not flinch from the question. She lifted one hand to her own ear and shook her head once. Then she touched 2 fingers to her eyes and, after a moment, to her chest. I have been doing it since I was 4, her mouth said. It is the only thing I have. He did not bring it to the council that night. He brought it to 2 people. Marin, because she was the only person in the keep who had ever told him he was being a fool and lived, and a captain of his personal guard named Elise, who had been 7 years old when he had been 20, and had idolized him so completely that she had grown up into the only officer in his garrison who would not lie to him to spare him. He sat them in the long room. He told them what Ilsa had said about the corridor. He told them, in even quieter words, who he believed had been in that corridor at that hour. Because there were only 3 men in the keep with a standing reason to walk that route at mid-morning, and only one of them wore soft soles indoors. The Seneschal Zachariah of House Phelan, Lord Zach to his peers. Trusted with the salt accounts, the Eastern Garrison's payroll, and the drafting of any treaty that touched the border cantons. Trusted, in other words, with the pieces of the kingdom Daron had not had time to look at himself in 2 seasons. Marin said slowly, Sire, you are about to suspect a man on the word of a deaf herbalist who has been in the keep for half a day. Daron said, I am about to suspect a man because a deaf herbalist who has been in the keep for half a day told me something that fits 3 other things I had failed to fit together. He laid them out. The grain manifest from the southern vassals that had been short by a weight he could not account for. The 2 scouts who had been reassigned to the north and never reported. The masked festival night last autumn when a man in the dyed wool of House Phelan had been seen leaving the lower city with a saddle pack he had not arrived with. And Darren had let it go because he had been tired, and Lord Zach had given a plausible explanation, and because, frankly, he had liked the man. He had liked the man. This, more than anything, was what was sitting in the bottom of Darren's chest like a stone. Elise, who had not spoken yet, said, What do you want? I want eyes on him for the next 48 hours. I want a parallel set on his cousin, who handles his correspondence. I want a courier intercepted, whichever one goes south after sundown. And I want the pouch read but not opened. Do you understand me? Read by the seal alone. I do not want him to know yet. She nodded once and was on her feet. At the door she paused. Sire, the herbalist. Yes. If she is wrong, she is not. If she is wrong, sire, you have made an enemy of a man who has served you for 15 years. If she is wrong, Darren said, I will tell him myself, and he will laugh at me, and we will drink from the same flask, and I will know I was a fool. If she is right, Elise. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Elise went out. Maren stayed. After a moment, she said, Darren. It had been 7 years since she had used his name. Darren, you carried her up the hill yourself. I did. Without speaking. There was no need. There was a need, Maren said gently, and you did not feel it. I have known you since you were 9. You have always needed to speak. He looked at the fire for a long time. The wolf in him, which had been a banked coal for 11 years, was a low, warm, rolling thing tonight. It was not pacing. It was lying down. He had not felt it lie down in the presence of a stranger, ever. He said at last, She will not stay. Why not? She has a son. She does not yet know if my house is a safe house for him. Until she knows, she will not stay. And I find, he said slowly, almost wonderingly, that I do not want her to stay until she has decided that for herself. Maren looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Then earn it. She left him with the fire. He sat there a long time. In the small east scullery on the other side of the keep, Tomas had fallen asleep on the pallet with his face in his mother's neck. Ilse was awake. She was watching the door of the scullery with the steady, patient attention of a woman who had spent 30 years reading rooms she could not hear. And she was cataloging every sound in the keep by the vibration it sent through the floorboards under her bare foot. And she was not afraid, because she had been hungrier than this, and more cornered than this, and more alone than this. And the king had carried her up a hill without speaking. The next morning, a courier was intercepted on the South Road, and Elise read the seal of the pouch he was carrying without breaking it. And she came back to the keep at a hard gallop, and she walked into the long room and she set the pouch on the table in front of Darren and she said, very quietly, It is Valen's seal, sire. It is going to a holding owned by his wife's family across the eastern border. It is not on any registry. It went out 3 days ago. It comes back every 12 days. It has been doing this for approximately 7 months. Darren looked at the seal. Wax the color of dried blood. The Valen crest. The little flourish at the bottom that Lord Zack added by hand, because Lord Zack had always been proud of his hand. Has he noticed his courier is late? Not yet, sire. We replaced the man on the road with one of ours. The pouch will arrive at the holding tonight, on schedule, with a substitute inside that says nothing and will not alarm them. We will know in 3 days whether they reply. Good. He sat with it. He sat with it for a long time. Elise waited because Elise had learned to wait. Finally, he said, Bring me Ilse. Sire, send Maren to the scullery first to ask if she will come. Do not bring her if she does not wish to come. And do not bring her without the boy. The boy goes where she goes from this morning forward. Elise's mouth twitched at the corner, the closest thing to a smile she ever permitted herself in front of him. Yes, sire. Ilse came. Tomas came beside her, holding her hand, wearing a clean tunic that someone in the kitchens had found for him, his hair combed flat with water. He looked solemn. He looked like a small steward. He looked, Darren thought, with a kind of hollow tenderness, like a child who had decided his job in this very large stone room was to make sure his mother was not alone in it. Darren had cleared the long room of everyone except Maren, who could be trusted, and Elise, who could be trusted, and a clerk named Petra who could be trusted because she could not write fast enough to gossip. He gestured Ilse to the chair across from him. She sat. Tomas climbed into her lap without being invited and arranged himself there. Darren found that he liked this very much. He spoke slowly, watching her watch his mouth. "Yesterday, when you turned your head in the scullery, will you tell me again what you read?" She lifted her hands. Petra began to write. Ilsa spoke with her hands and her mouth together, the way she had begun to do with him. And what came out was the most efficient briefing Darren had received from any source in 3 years. The footfalls, the pause at a side passage, the weight on the right hip, which she said now she thought was a leather case, not a weapon, because a weapon swings and a case does not. The soft soles, which she said were the kind worn by a man who did not want to wake a sleeping child or a sleeping dog, or, she added without looking up from her hands, a sleeping king. The turn at the second corner. The fact that the man had stopped a third time, which she had not mentioned the day before, because she had not been certain of it, and now she was. The third stop, she said, had been just outside the small archive room where the Eastern correspondence was kept. She had felt the floor under her foot shift when he stopped, because someone had stopped at that exact spot many times before, often enough to wear a faint hollow in the boards. She did not know if that was useful. Darren looked at Elise. Elise looked back at him. Petra had stopped writing because she had run out of breath. Ilsa did not seem to feel that she had said anything remarkable. She had simply answered the question. Tomas, in her lap, had reached up and was patting her cheek absently, as a child pats the side of a bowl to feel the warmth coming off it. Darren said slowly, "Ilsa, I am going to ask you something difficult." She nodded. "There is a man in this keep I have trusted for 15 years. I believe now that he has been moving against me for at least 7 months, possibly longer. I have one chance to confront him without him fleeing or burning his correspondence, or worse, harming the people he has compromised. To take that chance, I need to know what he says when I confront him, because he is more skilled at lying than any man I have ever known. I cannot read his face well enough. I have tried. Will you sit in the room when I bring him in? Will you read his mouth and his breath and tell me, after, what was true and what was not?" She held his eyes for a long moment. She did not answer immediately. She looked down at Tomas. She stroked his hair. She looked back up. Her hands moved. "If I do this, if your trusted man learns afterward that I was the eyes that read him, we will not be safe in this keep, or in the lower city, or in any town with a road that comes here. He will have time, before you arrest him, to send a name down the road. My name. My son's name." Darren said, "I will not let him send anything." "You will try not to." "I will not let him." She studied him. She studied him a long time. Tomas had gone still in her lap, the way children go still when they understand, without understanding, that the adults are speaking about something that contains them. At last, she said, "I will sit in the room. On 3 conditions." "Name them." "First, my son does not enter that room. Not at any point. Not for any reason. If something goes wrong, he is not in it." "Agreed." "Second, after. Whatever the outcome, we are not held in this keep against our will. If I want to walk down the hill with him, I walk down the hill with him." "Agreed." "Third." She paused. She seemed, for the first time since he had met her, slightly uncertain. Then her hands moved, plain and clear. "Do not ask me yet what I am to you. Do not ask me yet what you are to me. I have known you for 1 day. Ask me later. Ask me when I have decided whether your house is safe for him." She tilted her chin at Tomas. Darren's wolf, lying down inside him, made a small sound that no one else in the room could hear. He inclined his head. He did not speak. He had begun to understand that with her, a nod where another woman might want a vow was not less. It was more. She had asked for less than she was owed. He resolved, privately, in the bottom of his chest where he kept things he did not say aloud anymore, to give her more than she had asked. They brought Lord Zack in at dusk, because dusk was when he liked to take wine in the long room with the king, and Darren did not want to break that pattern in case Zack had eyes among the staff he had not yet identified. Ilsa sat at the side of the room, in a high-backed chair that was angled so that her face was in shadow, but the door was in light. A shawl had been put over her shoulders by Marin. Tomas was upstairs in the small sitting room next to the scullery, with Elisa's youngest sergeant reading him a book about a fisherman's daughter and a sea otter. And Darren had been told by the sergeant that Tomas had asked twice if his mother was downstairs, and had been told twice that yes, she was, and that Tomas had then politely returned his attention to the otter. Lord Zachariah of House Valen came in smiling. He was a handsome man, a year older than Darren, with the kind of face that aged well because it had never had to work very hard. He carried 2 cups. He set one in front of Darren. He took the chair opposite. He noticed Ilsa at the side of the room, and his eyes flickered, just once, and his smile adjusted. "A guest, sire. An advisor." "Ah." A small, careful pause. "On what subject?" "On the subject of the South Road." Lord Zack lifted his cup and took a slow sip. He did not look at Ilsa again. He looked at Darren, with the warm, direct gaze of a man who had known him for 15 years. "The South Road has been quiet, sire, as you know." "Has it?" "I sent Petra a brief on it 2 weeks past. Bandits in the lower passes. We set a patrol. They have been seen off." "Tell me about the courier you have running every 12 days to your wife's family holding across the eastern border." Lord Zack's hand did not move. His smile did not move. His eyes did not move. Darren, who had spent 15 years reading him, would have said in that moment that the man was telling the truth. Lord Zack said, "A small private matter, sire. Her mother is unwell. We have been sending physic at regular intervals. 12 days exactly. It is the round trip, sire." "What is in tonight's pouch?" "Tonight's pouch has not gone out." A thin, almost imperceptible pause. "It goes out tomorrow." Darren felt, rather than saw, Ilsa shift very slightly in the chair at the side of the room. He did not look at her. "Tomorrow." "Yes, sire." "Lord Zack, the pouch went out 3 nights ago. It was intercepted on the South Road last evening. It carried 4 sealed letters in a hand that is not yours, but is well known to you, all of them addressed to a holding that does not appear in any registry under your wife's family name, 2 of them naming officers in my eastern garrison, and 1 of them, my friend, naming me." Lord Zack set his cup down. He did this slowly. He looked at Darren for a long moment. He laughed, low and soft and surprised. The laugh of a man who has been caught at something he expected to be caught at eventually, but not tonight. "Well," he spread his hands. "Well, sire, that is unfortunate." "Tell me why." "I would prefer not to." "Tell me why anyway." "Greed, sire." The dull answer. "I had a debt. The debt grew. The men I owed offered to forgive it for information. The information, once given, did not stop being asked for. It rarely does. Names. I will give you names, if you will give me my exile rather than my execution. I will hear the names first and decide after." Lord Zack inclined his head. He gave the names. He gave them without flinching, without bargaining further, the way a man gives up a hand he had not really expected to win with. He gave 4. 2 were predictable. 1 was a captain Darren had liked. The 4th was a woman in the kitchens who had been receiving small sums to leave a particular window unbarred on particular nights. And Darren's stomach turned at this one because the kitchens were where Tomas had eaten his cheese that morning. When Lord Zack had finished, Darren said very quietly, "And the plan. The pouch this week. The full plan." Lord Zack hesitated. It was the first hesitation. Darren, watching him, did not press. He waited. Across the room, Ilsa was very still. Lord Zack said finally, "A small disturbance at the eastern gate the night after next. A diversion only. Some smoke, a few wounded guards. While the disturbance is contained, a man enters through the unbarred kitchen window and removes a particular ledger from your private study. The ledger goes south. With the ledger, sire, 3 vassals you depend on for winter grain renounce their oaths. Your western flank goes hungry by the spring. You become a king who cannot feed his cantons. You become, in other words, the kind of king men feel justified in replacing. Replacing with whom? Sire." Lord Zack smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." "A council, sire. A council of 7. I would have been one. I would not have been the largest one." Darren sat with this. The fire in the long room cracked. Lord Zack reached, slowly, for his cup, and drank, and set it down. Darren said, "Stand up." Lord Zack stood. "Walk to the door." Lord Zack walked to the door. At the door, Darren said, "Stop." Lord Zack stopped. Without turning, his back to the room, he said, "May I ask you a question, sire?" "Yes." "Who is the woman?" Darren said, "An advisor." "She has not spoken once. She does not need to." A long pause. Lord Zack said, very softly, "Ah, I see." He inclined his head once to the door. Elise stepped through it from the corridor with 2 guards. Lord Zack was taken without struggle. The door closed. Darren sat in the silence. He did not turn his head toward Ilsa. He waited. After a long moment, her voice came, in the way it came, hands and mouth together. 3 lies. Where? He told the truth about greed. He told the truth about the debt. He told the truth about the 4 names. The lie was in the plan. The diversion at the eastern gate is not the diversion. The disturbance is the diversion of the diversion. He wanted you to send Elise and your best guard to the eastern gate that night. The actual move comes from the south. He has been telling them for 2 months which corridors of the keep have been cleared of guards on which nights. And he has been telling them which corridors he himself walks at which hours. And tomorrow night, not the night after, he was to be in the south wing during the 3rd hour past sundown. And a window in the south wing was to be unbarred, and the men coming in were not coming for a ledger. They were coming for you. In your bed. Asleep. Darren sat with this for a long time. He felt, distantly, the wolf inside him stand up and circle once and lie down again, this time with its body across the door of his chest. He said, "How did you know?" His mouth said the eastern gate. His breath went out a half count too long before he said it. His eyes moved before his mouth did. He has been carrying the south wing in his face for 3 months. I saw it across a courtyard last summer when I came up to deliver time. I did not know what it meant then. I know now. Darren turned his head and looked at her. She looked back at him. She did not smile. She did not look proud. She looked tired. Her hands were folded in her lap. The shawl had slipped from one shoulder. He stood. He crossed the room. He knelt beside her chair, because to stand over her and speak down was to be a man who needed her to look up. And he did not need her to look up. He needed her to look across. He said, quietly, with his mouth shaped clearly, "You have just saved my life." She watched his lips. Her hands moved. "I have saved a king's life. The king now owes a debt. The debt is to my son." "Yes." "Then pay it to him." "I will. Now." She lifted her hands again. "Tonight, not tomorrow." He paid it that night. He did not wait for the council. He had the captain that Lord Zack had named woken from his bed and brought to the long room and confronted with the names of the other three. And the captain broke inside of 2 minutes because the captain had not expected to be named. He had the woman from the kitchens woken next, gently by Marin and not by guards, and the woman wept and gave him the names of the men she had been opening the window for. And Darren, who had been prepared to dislike her, found instead that she was a widow whose son had been press-ganged into the eastern garrison by Lord Zack himself 2 years ago and held there as collateral against her cooperation. And he sent a rider to the eastern garrison before dawn to fetch the boy home. And he forgave her the window. And she fell to her knees on the kitchen flags, and he made her stand up, because he did not, that night, have the stomach for anyone kneeling. He had the south wing emptied. He had a different bed made up for him, for the sake of theater, in the same chamber he always slept in, with a pillow and a heavy bolster arranged under the coverlet to suggest a man asleep. He had Elise station 2 of her best in the wardrobe and 2 more in the corridor outside, with strict instructions that the men coming through the unbarred south window were to be taken alive if any of them could be taken alive, and that none of them were to be killed if it could be avoided, because Darren wanted the chain that ran out of this keep, and he wanted every link of it. They came. There were 4 of them. 3 were taken alive. The 4th, a man Darren did not know by name, drew a short blade from inside his coat when Elise's sergeant put a hand on his shoulder, and the sergeant put him on the ground in a way that did not require killing him, but did require breaking his wrist, which the sergeant did, regretfully, and apologized to the man afterward in a low, even voice, while binding the wrist for transport. They were not, any of them, professional assassins. They were mercenaries with a contract and a fear in them. And the fear, once Darren sat across from them in the long room before sunrise and told them very plainly that their employer had been arrested and the holding across the eastern border had been seized at dusk, came out of them as fast information. And by the time the sun came up, Darren knew the names of 2 more men he had not previously suspected, and he had the address of the holding, and he had a list of 10 lesser conspirators who had been promised positions in the Council of 7, and he had, sitting in the bottom of his chest, a terrible quiet exhaustion that had almost nothing to do with not having slept. Lord Zachariah of House Phelan was sentenced at noon. Darren did not give him execution. Darren gave him exile, stripped of name, lands, title, escort, and the legal right of return. This was the harsher sentence, and Lord Zack, who had asked for it and been granted it, knew it was the harsher sentence. And Darren, watching him receive it, knew that Lord Zack would not survive a winter outside the cantons, because Lord Zack had spent 15 years inside warm rooms eating warm bread, and his body had forgotten how to be cold. And Darren, who had once loved him in the cool, measured way kings love their advisors, did not enjoy this knowledge, but did not flinch from it. Lord Zack was let out at first dark. He stopped once at the threshold of the long room. He turned his head. He looked, this time, directly at Ilsa, who was sitting in the same chair as the night before, in the same shawl, with Tomas asleep against her hip because Tomas had refused to be parted from her for the sentencing. Lord Zack said conversationally. Madam. Ilsa looked back at him. Her hands stayed in her lap. Lord Zack said, "Whatever he offers you, take twice." And then he smiled, the thin, warm, friendly smile he had used on Darren for 15 years. And he walked out of the long room into a winter that would, 2 weeks later, kill him on a road with no witnesses, in a manner so symmetrical to the manner he had planned for Darren, that Marin, when she heard the report, would set down her grinding pestle and stand at the kitchen window for a full minute without moving. After Lord Zack was gone, the long room was very quiet. Tomas slept on. Elise, by the door, shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Marin cleared the cups. Darren sat for a while, looking at his hands. After some time, he said, without looking up, "Ilsa." Her hands did not move because she could not see his mouth. He looked up then. "Ilsa," he said again, with his face turned toward her so she could read it. "Yes?" "I was going to do something foolish a moment ago. I was going to ask you if you would let me mark you." Her face did not change. He went on, slowly, picking the words. "It is the thing my kind do. There is a bite at the curve of the neck, witnessed by the court, that says publicly to my people that you are mine and I am yours, and we acknowledge each other. I have been preparing the words for it since I carried you up the hill. I had thought I would offer them to you tonight, in this room, before the council, so that no one in this keep could question your standing or his." A small motion at her hip, where Tomas was still asleep. "I am not going to offer them to you tonight." She watched his mouth. "Why?" her hands said. He said, "Because you told me yesterday not to ask you yet what we were to each other. Because you told me your house had to be safe for him before you would consent to any of it. Because tonight my house tried to kill me in my bed, and 3 men I have known for years were named as part of it, and the kitchens, where your son ate his cheese yesterday morning, contained one of the names. My house is not yet a safe house for him. I will not ask you to be marked into a house that is not yet safe for him. And I will not ask you in any other circumstance, because I do not want you to enter my court because you were grateful or tired, or because the room expected it of you. I want you to enter it, if you ever enter it, because you have decided it." She watched his mouth all the way through this. When he finished, she did not move for a long moment. Then her hands moved, slow and clear. "Thank you. That is the right answer." A pause. "I would have refused you. I know. I will refuse you again the next time if you ask too soon. I know. I may refuse you many times. I know." Her mouth softened, the closest thing to a smile he had yet seen on her. "Do you?" "Yes." She looked down at Tomas. She stroked his hair. She looked back up. She said, with her hands and her mouth together, "Then we will sit in your kitchen for a while, my son and I, and we will see what kind of king you are when no one is trying to kill you. And after some time, if it goes well, we will speak about it again. Not before." He inclined his head. He did not speak. He had begun, he realized, to speak less since she had come up the hill. He found that he liked himself better this way. The wolf inside him, which had spent 11 years pacing, was lying down with its chin on its paws. Outside, in the courtyard, the 3rd bell rang for midnight, and the 3rd nightfall since Tomas had walked up the hill with a stolen loaf in his arms ended. Quietly, with no one bleeding in the south wing, and a small, gray-eyed woman asleep in a high-backed chair with her son curled against her side, and a king kneeling beside the chair with his hand, very lightly, on the wood of the armrest. Not touching her, only near her, the way a man stands near a fire he is not yet sure he is allowed to warm at. 2 weeks later, at the sort of hour when the kitchens were just beginning to wake, but the keep above had not yet noticed dawn. Ilse was teaching her son to read a wolf's breathing. The small east scullery had become, in stages so gradual no one had named them, theirs. Maren had moved the heavier preserving work to the great kitchen and left the east scullery to Ilse, because Ilse had a knack with the dried herbs that Maren did not have, and because Ilse preferred the window over the inner garden, and because Tomas had taken to sleeping on a low pallet in the corner of the small sitting room next to it, and waking before the kitchen girls and asking, very politely, if he could help with the kindling. He could help with the kindling. He helped with the kindling. He had also, in the 2 weeks since the night the south wing had not become a graveyard, helped with the carrying of small baskets, the sweeping of a particular flagstone Maren liked kept clean, the feeding of an old gelding in the lower yard, who had become attached to him, and the very serious daily delivery of a sealed jar of honey water from Maren's stores to a woman in the lower district whose chest had been bad since the famine year, and who lived, Tomas had reported, in a doorway with a blue-painted lintel 2 streets down from the tanner's shed. Darren had been told about the honey water on the 2nd day, and about the blue lintel on the 5th, and about the gelding on the 7th. And he had not interfered with any of it, because he had begun to understand that the way Ilse had decided to live in his keep was not by becoming a court woman, but by extending the small, careful economy of her old life into the larger economy of his, and trusting the larger economy to bend around it. The larger economy was bending. The kitchens loved Tomas. The stables tolerated Ilse with the kind of grudging respect stables gave to people who did not flinch around horses. The council, which had received the news of Lord Zack in stages and had not finished digesting it, treated Ilse with a careful, formal courtesy that Maren had described to Darren, privately, as the courtesy of men who have not yet decided whether a thing is a danger or a mercy, and are waiting to see which it turns out to be. Darren had said that was fine. They could wait. He himself had stopped waiting. This morning he had come down to the small east scullery because he had not slept well, and the long room had felt too large, and the wolf in him had been pacing again, in the old way. And the old way had used to be something he managed by walking the parapet, but he had discovered in the last fortnight that the old way could also be managed by sitting very still on a low stool in a warm scullery with his back against a brick wall and watching a woman handle dried thyme. Ilse was at the table by the window. Tomas was on her hip. There was a shaggy yearling wolf sleeping on a folded blanket by the hearth. The wolf's name was Brindle. He had been brought in by one of Elise's outriders 3 days previously, after his mother had been killed by a trap on the northern slope. And Darren had said, half because the keep had not housed a young wolf in his lifetime, and half because he wanted to see what Ilse would do, that the yearling could stay until he was old enough to be released or claimed. Ilse had looked at the yearling, on an instinct that Darren had not been able to explain to himself afterward, had gone to her and laid its head across her foot. She had said with her hands and her mouth, "He stays." So Brindle stayed. This morning Brindle was asleep on the blanket. Tomas was watching him, intent, with his small hands gripped in his mother's apron. Ilse was speaking to her son with her hands and her mouth together, in the careful, unhurried way she had been speaking to him for 6 years. Watch his side. Tomas watched. Count. Tomas counted. What did you count? 6. 6 what? 6 in and 6 out. Slow or fast? Slow. What does that tell you? Tomas thought about it. He thought about it the way a 6-year-old thinks about things, with his whole face. He is asleep deep. Yes. He is not afraid. No. He is warm. Yes. A pause. Tomas said, if he was afraid, then his sides would be quick and shallow, and he would not let me put my foot near him. Yes. If he was hungry, then he would not be asleep in the first place. Tomas considered this. That is fair. Darren, on the stool, did not move. He had learned, over the last fortnight, that to be in this room was to be allowed to be in this room only as long as he did not take up more space in it than he had been given. He took up exactly the corner near the brick wall. The wolf in him, which had once been a banked coal, and then a low, warm, rolling thing, and then, in the last week, something quieter and more domestic for which he did not yet have a word, was lying across the threshold of his chest, with its eyes half shut and its ears tracking the boy's small voice. Ilsa turned her head. She had felt him come in 20 minutes ago, by the change in the air through the open door, and she had not said anything because saying anything would have turned the morning into a court morning, and she had not yet decided that the morning needed to be a court morning. Now she looked across the scullery at him, her mouth shaped, very slightly, good morning. His mouth shaped, good morning. Tomas, on her hip, turned his head and saw Darren. He said with the unself-conscious frankness of a 6-year-old who had decided 2 weeks ago that this large, quiet man was a fixture of mornings. We are reading Brindle's Breathing. I see that. You have to start with a sleeping one because a sleeping one is easier. Ma'am says you read a hard one by knowing what an easy one looks like first. Your ma'am is right. Do you want to count? Darren looked at Ilsa. Ilsa looked back at him. Her face was very still. The corner of her mouth, the right one, lifted a fraction. He understood, in the way he was learning to understand her, that this was a yes and also a small private joke about the size of the question her son had just asked and the size of the answer it required. Darren stood up from the stool. He crossed the scullery slowly, because the yearling was a wild creature, and even a sleeping wild creature deserved slow feet. He sat down on the floor beside the blanket. He laid his palm very lightly on the wood of the floorboard near Brindle's flank. Thomas slid down from his mother's hip and came to sit next to him on the floor, cross-legged, his small, grave face turned up. Count, Thomas said. Darren counted. He counted 6 in and 6 out, slow, in the warm, low rhythm of a creature that was warm and not afraid and not hungry. And he felt, in the bottom of his chest, the thing that had begun 2 weeks ago at the threshold of a tanner's shed, and had not been named since then, and would not be named today either. The steady, careful release of a held breath he had not known, until a small, gray-eyed woman had walked into his life with a stolen loaf of bread held by her son, that he had been holding for 11 years. Outside, the first of the kitchen girls came down the inner stair, saw the king on the floor of the small east scullery beside a sleeping yearling wolf, and a 6-year-old boy, and a woman teaching them both to count, and turned around and went back up the inner stair, and did not tell anyone for the rest of her life that she had seen it. Inside, Tomas said, "Now do me." Darren looked at the boy. You? Count me. Tomas lifted his small chest deliberately. I am awake. I am not afraid. I am warm. I am a little hungry. See if you can read it. Darren looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he counted. He got it right. Tomas, satisfied, leaned against his shoulder. Ilsa at the table went back to her time. The morning went on. Some endings are quiet like that. Until next time.